Hey guys, Matt Allen here. Welcome back to Tactical Bassin. Today we're talking swim jigs versus chatterbaits. Which one should you be fishing? So what is the difference? Why do we have these different baits? Why do we throw a chatterbait in one circumstance, a swim jig in another? For that matter, why are we not just throwing a plain swim bait head? What are the differences and how can we adapt that? How do we take that, apply it directly to your fishing to catch more fish? That's what we're talking about today. So for starters, even though this isn't part of it, let's talk about the actual swim bait. The swim bait is incredibly effective at imitating a bait fish, be that a shad, a shiner, all sorts of small bait fish can be imitated with a swim bait. You can also imitate them with a swim jig or with a chatterbait. But what a swim bait, a standard swim bait on a jig head, doesn't do an amazing job of imitating is panfish, bluegill, crappie, things like that, because their bodies are bigger, they're bulkier, and that's where that swim jig really kicks in with more bulk. That chatterbait, more like a bluegill, you can really branch out and match those other bait fish more effectively. Now, where the swim bait shines, where it's at its absolute peak, is clear water. Now, can I take this and change the color or the weight of the head, fish it deeper, fish it in a white or a chartreuse or in a bluegill tone and catch fish? Of course I can. But you have those other baits that are better suited for the situation. So for now, let's take that swim bait and set it aside. And let's talk chatterbaits and swim jigs. They fish in very similar environments. The benefit of a swim jig, well, there's several benefits, but it will fish around virtually anything. I don't care how thick the cover is. It'll fish in grass, it'll fish in wood, you can skip it under docks, you can throw it right into the heart of the thickest lily pads. It'll come through all of that stuff. It also has incredible secondary action from that skirt, where that skirt is pulsing and moving, if you pair them with the right trailers. That is critical with a swim jig. There is not a lot of room for error. There are trailers that are perfect and there are trailers that are not perfect, and that is just the way it is. Now, chatterbaits, you have more wiggle room. A chatterbait will fish great around grass. Not super thick grass, but it will still fish really well around grass. It'll fish well in the open, it'll fish well around cover, and it does a great job of pulling a reaction strike, a core response out of a bass. Now, the murkier the water, the chatterbait shines. But there are times where it's great in clear water too. Now, we know that if the water is just clear all the time, more often than not, you're best off with that swim bait. We know that. But if you're imitating bluegill, panfish, larger shad, larger shiners, perch, all sorts of those other bait fish that have a larger profile, swim jigs and chatterbaits are a better option. If your water is murkier, they're a better option. If you have more grass in the water, they're a better option. And if it is summertime, for whatever reason, they can be your best option. So let's talk about where we fish each one and how to adapt it to your fishing. The swim jig is an amazing bait. Now this guy, the California swim jig with this super heavy wire hook, was the first heavy wire swim jig ever put on the market. And I designed that with Kurt from Dirty Jigs well over a decade ago. We needed a jig that could handle bigger bass. We were taking all sorts of swim jigs from across the market and just bending them out on great big fish on the California Delta and on Clear Lake. The jigs just couldn't handle it, and we needed a massive jig for those massive fish. So we designed that first heavy wire swim jig, and it's been incredible ever since. But standard swim jigs are also amazing. So what is the deal? If I'm fishing around a lot of grass, calmer conditions, I'm turning to that swim jig. The swim jig is more subtle than a chatterbait. The skirt, if you pair it up, so this is a river to sea D-walker. And there are 3 or 4 really good trailers out there that I've found that will make a swim jig do what it needs to do. If you put a Kitech on the back of this, if you put one of a lot of different baits on the back of a swim jig, will it catch fish? Of course it will. But are you maximizing your time? No. What you are looking for is a trailer that will kick so hard, it will move so hard that it actually starts to wag the head of the bait as it's swimming, either side to side or up and down. And as that happens, that skirt on its own will begin to pulse and to flow. And that is secondary action. When that skirt is doing that, the tail kicking is primary action. That skirt pulsing and moving, that's secondary. That's going to imitate what a swim bait never can. The swim bait only has primary action. That swim jig will imitate fins moving, flash coming off of scales, all those things that actually make a fish look real and a swim bait look fake. If you can get that skirt pumping, it fills in that middle ground. You get that secondary action, you get a larger profile, more like a panfish, and you get those big bites. So the right trailer is important. Now a standard swim jig like this is just a Dirty Jig swim jig, and there are a handful of companies that make a great swim jig. A standard swim jig, what I do with that is just fish it around cover. Throw it along the edges of cover and just swim it. And I do that with the lighter California swim jigs too. Just throw them up and just swim them back. And because I've chosen the right trailer, that thing is moving on its own. So I don't have to shake my rod. I don't have to do anything. I just chuck and wind. The bait is doing everything on its own. Those fish will just come out and gobble that thing. Now, there's a time and a place to fish a swim jig with a craw trailer on it. And a lot of people do that. But that's not what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about bait fish profiles. So that's what I do with the lighter swim jig, say a 3/8, even lighter than that, up to about a 1/2 ounce. Once I cross that 1/2 ounce mark, I'm throwing that California swim jig, 1/2 and 3/4, and I'm throwing it into thick stuff. So same situation, calmer water, higher sun, hot days. It is the middle of summer. The hotter it gets, the bass that are in the shallows, whether you're in a pond or a giant lake, if there is shallow grass, the bass pull into the heart of that grass. And they get in there to sit in that shade and to feed ambush style. So they're not running around searching for a meal. They get right in the shade, they sit under that overhead cover, and when something comes right past them, they eat it. What I do with a California swim jig, with that heavy hook, 3/4 ounce head, is I bust that cover. And that is something that almost no other bait will do in a fish profile. If you're punching, that's what you're doing vertically with a creature bait. But I'll take that heavy swim jig, and instead of fishing the lanes in the grass where other people are fishing, I'm aiming right for the thickest piece of cover, because I know that the biggest fish is under the thickest cover in the darkest shadow. And I will swim that swim jig in. So instead of going down the side of the cover, I come straight in and smash into it and then rip it free. Just blow my way through that grass. Just reel it right in until it's stuck and then pop it loose and then keep on going. Get stuck, pop it loose. I don't worry about going around the cover. I go through it, because other people aren't doing that, and that is where the best fish are. You'll find, you'll get bites in the open, but you'll get that thing in there and you'll feel it start to load up because it's getting stuck in the grass. Well, that's when you're in there with the fish. So I continue to reel until it's stuck, because right before it's truly stuck, you get that freight train bite, because that fish was right there and I just came in and smashed that cover over the top of his head, and he just turns and eats that thing, just lashes out on it. That's what I use a swim jig for. The swim jig has a great kick, great movement, great action, and if those fish want to eat it, they'll come out and munch that thing. So what do I do with a chatterbait? What's the deal there? Chatterbaits are similar, but not the same. Chatterbaits have a great skirt. You pair a great trailer on there, you've got a good profile. And because that blade is kicking, that skirt will pulse and move. It doesn't matter what trailer's on there, you can usually get good action out of the skirt. Now that said, let me back up. The trailer absolutely matters to the overall profile as well as to the overall action. So I have very specific trailers I use. My number one in the summertime is that Spunk Shad. This is a 4.5, this is a 5.5. The 5.5 is my overall favorite. I only downsize if I'm getting short strikes or if I'm trying to imitate smaller bait fish. Now, the chatterbait, just like a swim jig, is great at imitating everything from a shad to a bluegill, everything in between. So I can throw those shad tones like that guy. Or let's say I'm down in Florida and I'm in that stained water, that tannic looking water, dark water. Maybe I'll turn to that black blue. Or maybe I'm in a pond and I know my fish are eating bluegill. There's no shad in there. I turn to that either bluegill, true bluegill, or I turn to green pumpkin. Maybe something like that with just a little bit of chartreuse in it. And this trailer, a Spunk Shad, is that pointed trailer. It's amazing for imitating those narrower bait fish, shad, minnows. But that guy, that big bite, that tail, when it's coming through the water, that tail is kicking and it looks so good, and it's great at imitating a bluegill or other panfish. So I'm taking the type of trailer and the color to get it to imitate different bait fish for different scenarios. The bait itself is the same. You know, for the most part, I throw a jackhammer, but there are a couple of these other really good ones that also work really well. The one thing I will say is that over time, as I've played with all these different versions of the chatterbait, some have stronger clips on them than others. So the jackhammer I leave totally stock. Most of the others I've started replacing the clips on over time if I'm catching big fish. If I'm just catching fish, don't even worry about it. Just go fishing, you'll be fine. But pay attention, and if you notice that a clip has opened on your chatterbait, you should change that out. So in the video description, in addition to all the baits, colors, trailers, all the gear, all that stuff, I'll also link you a couple of really good clips that are super strong for their size that I use to change out on them. Because if you're around big ones, say you're in Florida in the grass and you stick a monster and you're trying a bulldog and you come back with just a snap, you're not happy, obviously. I've had a lot of snaps open in heavy cover. So I started upgrading my snaps. Again, not on the jackhammer, but on the others. But if you're catching regular size fish, don't worry about it. So trailer is everything with the chatterbait, because the trailer will finish the profile. So a trailer like this is great for imitating panfish. And again, the Spunk Shad, my overall favorite, is great for everything else. The main reason I like a Spunk Shad, and the main thing that I do with a chatterbait, here is the difference. Swim jigs, I fish through the heart of the cover. Chatterbaits, I either fish around the edges or over the top. Okay, if you fish around the edges, you're just going right down the sides of the grass and those fish will come out and get it. Or you go over the top, and right as it starts to hang up, you pop it free and you just keep going, pop it free, keep going. You don't let it burrow in there like you do a swim jig. The difference between them is that I can use a chatterbait, and if I know how to do it, I can draw a reaction. The swim jig, for the most part, you're going to catch those fish that just want to eat it. They see the profile, they come out and they eat it. The exception is when I'm busting cover with that California swim jig. When I just come in and crash into their house, that's a reaction strike. But other than that, you're just chucking and winding and they just come out and eat it. Well, I can do the same with a chatterbait. I can chuck and wind, but I can also work that bait. I can pump that handle. So I'm reeling along and I just give it an extra pump. I typically don't stop. So there's two ways to affect the action. If I'm reeling along steady and I stop, the chatterbait will break cadence and it'll fall. I don't like that. Some people do that. That's how they break the cadence. They'll be reeling along, they just pause, and then they keep going. I don't like when that chatterbait is swimming, it just slows down. Because bait fish that are being chased typically don't slow down and wait to get eaten. They try to get away. So what I like is when I'm reeling along, I add a snap, or I add 2 of them. And that chatterbait will cut and dart and move a lot like a jerkbait does. And it will draw an actual feed response. Like some of those other famous baits we talk about, the jerkbait, speed cranking, hop and a lipless, baits that get a true core response out of a fish. You can get a chatterbait in that situation to fit that category and to get fish to feed that are just casually following. They're just following because they're a fish. They're not gonna hit it. But when you get a good kick out of that bait and it starts to drift, something inside them triggers and they just lash out and eat it. So a lot of my chatterbait bites come after I've pumped that thing. Right on that first or second pump, boom, they hit that thing over and over. It's clockwork. So the type of trailer matters. The spunk shad, because of its shape, because there's not a big tail back here, when I do that, it does a great job of moving and it'll cut to the side, as opposed to more of a full bodied trailer with like a big paddle tail on it or something like that. Those trailers, when you go to do that, they're dragging in the water and they'll keep it from turning. So they really will cut down on that action. They still look good, they still catch fish, but they're not great for triggering that feed response like that spunk shad is. So again, the chatterbait can draw a reaction strike, but normally I'm throwing it in either murkier water or when I've got a pretty good chop on the water. So let's back up just quick few seconds of recap. I'm not even going to get into rods and reels and stuff because I talked so long, but down in the video description I will include that, my favorite chatterbait rod, my favorite swim jig rod, that sort of stuff. Clearer, calmer, smaller bait fish, swim bait. Calmer, but around cover, the fish are up feeding, maybe they're chasing bait, swim jig. Fish burrowed in the cover in the middle of summertime, heavy swim jig. Bass are up feeding, but maybe the water's murkier, chatterbait. Chop on the water, chatterbait. Fish are in the grass, but all the grass is the same, so it's not clumps, it's just a field of grass. Chatterbait, because I can catch the tops of that stuff and pop it free and get that reaction strike. And with the swim jig, I would just be slow rolling, hoping that they come out and eat it. Okay, so very similar baits that shine in different circumstances and for small, different purposes. And then again, when it comes to color, it's just going to come down to 1, what kind of bait fish you're trying to imitate, and 2, how clear your water is. Again, down in the video description, I'll link all of the baits, all of the trailers, favorite colors, favorite sizes, and the gear. But this is something that you can adapt into your fishing this summer. I'm sure most people already have a chatterbait, already have either a swim jig or a small swim bait, one or the other. Now that you understand the fine nuances of how to adapt them, you can catch a lot more fish on those baits the rest of the summer. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and we'll talk to you soon.